We'll have to move.
Yeah, and we can certainly do all of that here. But if you're from Tuvalu or the Cook Islands or such an island, it's much more difficult. There's there's nowhere to retreat to.
No, and there's been some useful work done by Professor Paul Kent, who used to be at Auckland University, in regard to those islands, and he certainly indicates that coastal erosion may not be quite the big issue that it was thought, but there are a lot of other implications, rising groundwater, salination of groundwater supplies and so on, which are quite significant issues. Right. So you're dead right. They are paying the cost of the standard of living elsewhere, which is not particularly just.
Fascinating topic, Jim, and I really appreciate your time on the panel. The coastal scientist Jim Dunn there, who spent the last 35 years looking at coastal management and erosion. Well, it's 5 away from 5 here on the panel. You listen to RNZ National, Alan Wallace-Chapman, and to a very, very important story. Can you control how loudly you sneeze? Here at RNZ Auckland, we have a colleague who will remain unnamed, who is an extremely loud sneezer. And this person gets a fair bit of flack for their sneezes, which can be heard...
name names.
Very tempted. Across the entire office. This person says they can't control how loud they sneeze. But Professor Richard Harvey, St Vincent's and Macquarie University Hospitals in Australia, told the ABC that how loud you sneeze depends on your lung capacity, your size, and how long you hold your breath for. So the longer you hold the breath, the more dramatic your sneeze is. And he reckons you should never try to hold your sneeze in. And there was a person hospitalised for 1 week who tried to do exactly that.
Is it true that you blow, because I was always told if you try and hold a sneeze and it blows your eardrums out, like you're basically going to blow your nose off your face.
Well, what happened to this person, 34-year-old person who did that, it resulted in a perforated pharynx, the part of the throat just above the larynx and esophagus. He found it impossible to swallow without extreme pain. He lost his voice and was hospitalised for a week.
My father used to tell me that if you hold your sneeze, it come out the other end, so it was better to sneeze. That's what he told me.
I'm a loud sneezer, I have to confess. My husband's always on at me. He's like, can't you do that quietly? No, you can't. If you're going to sneeze, you're going to sneeze.
Don't you stand by proper etiquette, though, Linda?
Well, I read that in the story. Apparently it's my fault, isn't it? I've got appalling nasal etiquette.
Well, you're supposed to say achoo. Oh. You don't say that, Shane?
No, I don't think I'm a particularly big sneezer or frequent sneezer, but it is a bit of an issue in our household with the young guy, and we've had to try and teach him sneezing etiquette.
I love how in this story from the ABC it says how a senior lecturer of sociology in Western Australia says the sound of your sneeze comes down to class, gender, and culture, and that apparently we're just not reading the manners books.
And ought we not to be a little bit concerned that we've got whole professions looking at the issue of sneezing?
That's hilarious.
Well, there's that too. But there's something quite satisfying, isn't there, Shane, about a jolly good sneeze?
The worst is when you can feel it coming, but it doesn't quite, like, I'm going to sneeze.
Frustrating, isn't it?
And it doesn't come.
Oh, a bit of response about coastal erosion. There's a whole row of batches that have fallen into the sea at Whatarangi on the Cape Palliser Road over the last few years. Interesting, isn't it? Do you still keep in touch with your roots at Port Waikato there, Linda?
Oh, of course.
Beautiful part of the country, isn't it?
I actually wrote a love letter to it for a book that Paul Little did recently called Love Letters to the Landscape. But I remember Port Waikato because that's where we used to go for New Year's Eve and, you go snog somebody at the old surf club.
There you go.
Those were the days. Those were the friends' days, eh?
Yeah, that's what the woman to have a bit of a reputation.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Ko Lisa Owen Takuingwa. E haere ake nei. The Labour Party president was gone by lunchtime today after the Prime Minister confirmed extremely serious allegations were put before the party months ago. Jacinda Ardern's apologised to the complainants. Still, there's so many more questions. We try and get you some answers. Health officials are accused of using depressed patients as guinea pigs. Almost 3 years on, an arrest is finally made in the execution-style killing of an Upper Hutt woman, and a Christchurch quantity surveyor claims some quake victims were treated as numbers. No showers, no power and plenty of mud. We check in at Ihumātao.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Ihumātao tēnei. The National Party Deputy Leader is calling for the resignations of senior staffers in the Prime Minister's office who she believes knew about sexual assault allegations. Paula Bennett used parliamentary privilege to name the director of the Labour leader's office, Jacinda Ardern's chief press secretary, and her former chief of staff as all having known for some time about the allegations. This comes just hours after the sudden resignation of the Labour Party President, Nigel Howarth. Mrs Bennett says it's just not possible that Ms Ardern wasn't aware of the allegations of sexual assault before this week.
There are so many senior people within the Prime Minister's office and other senior ministers that know and knew the extent of it that it's inconceivable that she wasn't told.
Paula Bennett says she hopes Mr Howarth doesn't become the scapegoat for other people's inaction. The inspector in charge of the investigation into Lois Tolley's murder says her family have remained strong in the 2.5 years since her death. The Upper Hutt woman was killed execution style on December 9th, 2016. A 27-year-old man was arrested for the murder and appeared in court today. Inspector Scott Miller says the police are pursuing other people who they believe were also involved. He says Lois Tolley's mother, in particular, has been strong as the investigation has stretched out.
I've personally spoken to Loie's mum, Catherine, every 2 weeks for 2 years and 9 months, and often that is very hard, obviously, for the family, but they are very strong at this time.
Scott Miller says despite more work to do, he's relieved to have the arrest. The accused man is being held in custody before another court appearance. Auckland City's top police officer says it's disappointing a man was able to escape from officers by scaling a wall. The police are looking for 28-year-old Michael Luke Robertson, who yesterday got away from the 2 officers who were escorting him by pretending he was about to vomit. He was being moved from a patrol car into the Avondale police station at the time. He is the 5th man to escape from the police in 3 weeks. The District Commander, Karen Malthus, says what happened will be investigated.
The staff involved, the police officers involved, are quite gutted by this incident. But I'd also like to point out that, they come to work every day to do their very, very best, and no one comes to work to have these mistakes happen.
Karen Malthus says the incident will be included in a national review of the police's custody and transport of offenders. That was triggered by the escape of 3 men in Levin last month and the escape of 1 man in Rotorua. MPs have today voiced their frustration at MedSafe and the Ministry of Health over their comments on an antidepressant brand change. More than 500 adverse side effects have been reported since the change to a generic brand of venlafaxine. Health officials made a submission to Parliament's Health Select Committee in response to a petition seeking an inquiry into Pharmac's patient safety protocols for generic medications. National Health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse wasn't satisfied with MedSafe's comment that the reports didn't raise safety concerns.
That may well be the case with the medicines themselves, but that doesn't mean that 562 people haven't had adverse reactions for whatever reason.
Michael Woodhouse says MedSafe's comments lacked empathy. Arab countries have condemned a pledge by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to apply Israeli sovereignty over the Jordan Valley if he is re-elected next week. That would effectively amount to annexing a large part of the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian Authority's chief international negotiator, Saeb Erekat, says such a move would bury any prospect of peace for 100 years.
Annexation of occupied territories is a war crime. So Mr. Netanyahu and those who help or aid Mr. Netanyahu in such a vision of annexing Jerusalem, annexing Hebron, annexing the Jordan Valley, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, and then keeping Palestinians in their small towns and villages as prisoners without any freedom, that is a war crime.
The Palestinian Authority's chief international negotiator, Saeb Erekat. School nurses are now being signed off as vaccinators to reach the estimated 17,000 Auckland teenagers who have not had the MMR jab. More than 20 nurses will be registered to administer the vaccine at 34 schools throughout South Auckland. 3 schools have already started vaccinating on-site, and the rest are expected to begin early next week. County's Manukau General Manager of Child, Youth and Maternity, Carmel Alice, says they have fast-tracked the nurses' training to target schools.
we will potentially reach an additional 17,000 young people. Just looking at our numbers, as we said before, we don't quite know what the number of unimmunised students might be. But if we're looking at kind of our coverage at the moment in terms of people coming through our pop-up clinics, we are struggling with the kind of 15 to 29 age group.
Carmel Ellis. It's 5:05. Team New Zealand have begun on-water tests, and American Magic have become the first to foil under sail in the new boats being used for the next America's Cup. First to officially launch their first boat on Friday, Team New Zealand put their mast in for tests on Auckland's Waitemata Harbour this morning. But one of the two US challenges for the 2021 regatta has been first to reach another major milestone. American Magic have posted a picture to social media showing former Team New Zealand skipper Dean Barker at the wheel of their first boat as it foils above the water in Rhode Island. The two other major challengers, Italian team Luna Rossa and British syndicate team Ineos UK, haven't officially launched their first boats. Top para swimmer Sophie Pascoe says her motivation to succeed remains strong. Pascoe won her 10th world title with victory in the women's 100-metre backstroke for S9 at the World Championships in London this morning. It came less than a day after she won the 100 metres freestyle. Pascoe says she's no longer just winning for others.
I want to do a bit of this for me now. I mean, don't get me wrong, that part of doing it for everyone else is still there and very much a big part of my journey in swimming. But now it's about doing it for myself and leaving behind, hopefully, this amazing legacy for others to look at.
Sophie Pascoe. England's made it 4 wins from 4 games in the European Football Championship qualifiers with a 5-3 win over Kosovo. Reigning champions Portugal are second in their group after a 5-1 win over Lithuania. That's the news.
Eradicating extremism online.
It's nebulous and won't achieve anything. You're not focusing, you're not putting your time from the PM down on the issues that matter to New Zealanders.
Unintended messages.
It's almost dog whistling. It's really, really dangerous. You're barking up towards a segment of society that will actually literally translate that into action.
And you're fired.
The president's entitled to the staff that he wants, and he should have people that he trusts and values.
Another one bites the dust. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online. Then on 9 to noon, 7% of Kiwis hold more than one job. What are the gig economy pitfalls? And after 10, mathematical biologist Kit Yates on the value of maths in everyday life and death. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, cloudy periods and isolated showers until tomorrow afternoon. Bay of Plenty, mainly fine. Waikato to Kapiti, including central high country. Cloudy periods, the odd shower in the west and about high ground. Gisborne to Wairarapa, partly cloudy with isolated showers tonight, fine tomorrow. Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine weather. Bulla and Westland, mainly fine tonight. The occasional shower about Bulla. Showers tomorrow, turning to rain about southwestland from tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy. For Fiordland, also Stewart Island, a few showers turning to rain for a time tonight and again tomorrow evening, with heavy falls later tomorrow as well. Otago and Southland, excluding Stewart Island, isolated showers about Southland and Clutha tonight, otherwise fine. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a period of rain tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thank you, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Gone this past lunchtime, Labour President Nigel Haworth. His departure is the latest twist in the ongoing controversy over the party's handling of allegations against a Labour staffer. The Prime Minister accepted his resignation after viewing correspondence that complainants wrote to the party several months ago. Now, that correspondence confirmed extremely serious allegations had been made.
So we sought that correspondence and upon reading that it became very clear to me that despite the best intentions, despite the plans of the party to conduct a process that they thought would bring resolution, it caused harm, and that is not acceptable. I've sought the correspondence as soon as I knew that existed.
Jacinda Ardern also apologised on behalf of the party.
I do want to offer an apology on behalf of the Labour Party to those complainants in this case who have gone through a process that I believe has caused them harm.
The Prime Minister says she is now waiting for a QC's report into the handling of the complaints. Still, Nigel Haworth stands by his earlier claims that allegations of a sexual assault by a Labour staffer were not provided to the investigation panel, and he was not told about them at a prior meeting. A 19-year-old volunteer claims she was sexually assaulted by the Labour staffer last year and says she raised it with Labour's ruling council during an internal investigation, but no disciplinary action was taken. Another complainant told Checkpoint he raised the alleged assault with the panel too, and at a face-to-face meeting with Nigel Haworth after the panel sat. Nigel Haworth, now the immediate past president of the Labour Party and current sacrificial lamb. But dispatching him in no way ends this. Here's the reaction of one of the complainants. His words are spoken by someone else.
Nigel Haworth's resignation comes as a huge relief to us as victims today. The process was deeply flawed and unfairly compromised. However, the man who abused us remains to be held accountable for his behaviour. For too long, victims have had to endure extensive abuse at the hands of powerful men. That must end now. We're taking back control.
Haworth's resignation or sacking, depending on your take, still leaves a pile of unanswered questions way too big to slip under a carpet corner. Did Haworth know about the sexual assault allegations or not? What about other Labour Party figures identified by the party as being in the know? And what about the man who allegedly committed the assaults? What's happening with him? We've been searching for these answers and more.
Well, at the moment I support him because I fully support Nigel. Yeah, I fully support Nigel because I haven't been given anything to the fact that he has done anything wrong.
That's Hani Heme, one of the 3 Labour Party members who were on the investigation committee that heard directly from the complainants. She was speaking to our producer Bridget Burke just hours before the press release announcing Haworth's departure crash-landed in our email.
At the end of the day, I think that I was put on the panel because I'm not afraid to say what I want to say. You know, I'm not looking at being an MP or a bloody Prime Minister, and so it seemed like a difficult issue, and I was put there, and I thought that we did a bloody good job of what we had.
Like the recently departed Haworth, she was adamant, initially at least, that no allegations of a sexual nature were raised with the investigating committee.
Did anyone that appeared before your panel mention the words sexual assault or sexual abuse?
No. And certainly not the key person that is talking to the media.
So why would they be saying that there were concerns?
I don't know. I haven't spoken to her. I'd like to speak to both of them.
You believe that there was no sexual assault committed on his behalf and what you found?
That wasn't my scope to investigate a sexual assault. You know, as far as I was concerned, that's a criminal act and it should have gone to the police. And so that conversation never came up. I was to investigate bullying.
Right, so you think the scope was too narrow to start?
And it was about bullying and the behaviours around that.
And you found that there was no action required as a result of these claims of bullying?
No.
Okay.
There was, yeah. No, there was, and there were policies that were put in place, but things got, and things got in the way, and so the QC review happened.
When you say things got in the way, what do you mean?
Well, the investigation, I had seen our part as finished. One of the complainants, I believe, because my job had been done, had gone back again for another meeting with the hierarchy.
By the end of the interview, Hani Heme appears to be doubting her own recollection.
At any stage from any of the 5 complainants that gave verbal testimony or written testimony to the panel on which you sat with 2 others, at any point was there expressed concerns about sexual behaviour relating to the alleged offender?
Yeah. Because you keep asking me this question all the time. As far as, in my opinion, there wasn't.
Well, the word sexual...
I mean, it was earlier this year too, and I've taken on other projects, and in the last 24 hours I'm trying to get my self back in the beginning of this year. You know, sometimes, and at the moment I'm starting to doubt my own recollection.
Hane Heme says she doesn't know what Nigel Haworth knew because they never had that conversation. The Prime Minister has, though.
The party has maintained its position that none of the complainants directly came to them claiming that they had been sexually assaulted.
That directly contradicts at least two complainants. One who spoke to Checkpoint says he raised allegations of sexual and physical assault with the investigation committee, other senior party members and directly with Nigel Haworth.
I told them about his experiences with other women that were tantamount to sexual assault, sexual abuse.
So you raised concerns about sexually inappropriate behaviour to this committee?
Yes.
Are you sure that you raised the sexual allegations with the committee?
Definitely issues relating to sexual assault and sexual abuse.
How can you be sure of that, your recollection?
Because I remember it.
So you're sure that you told this committee at that point that there were issues around inappropriate sexual behaviour by this person?
Yes. I myself met with Nigel and described elements of sexual abuse and sexual assault, but also wider sexual abuse and rape culture within the party itself.
And so at that meeting, you explicitly raised with him allegations of sexual assault?
Yes. Nigel Haworth knew that there were elements of sexual assault and sexual abuse within the claims that were brought before the investigation committee. That was very clear right from the beginning. Everyone in the investigation panel knew that.
Checkpoint has seen a copy of an email sent from the complainant addressed to Labour President Nigel Haworth, expressing dissatisfaction at the investigation. The email was sent on May 21st this year, and it explicitly includes the words predatory behaviour, sexual violence and physical violence. In accepting Haworth's resignation, the Prime Minister said she too had seen correspondence from several months ago between the complainants and the Labour Party, and that correspondence confirmed to her that the allegation made was, quote, extremely serious. Here's Hane Heme again.
The narrative is that there's a big, huge cover-up, you know. If people knew me, they know that I wouldn't stand for a bloody cover-up.
At least two complainants say transcripts of the evidence they gave to Labour's investigation committee are inaccurate. So who took the minutes at that meeting? Not Hane Heme.
Do you remember who was taking the minutes of the panel? Who minuted the testimony?
Yeah, it was Simon. Simon's the lead person because he was the lawyer.
Simon Mitchell, a lawyer, a Northern representative on Labour's council, and one of the three on the investigation committee. Checkpoint contacted him. He didn't want to talk about it. In an email between Labour Party officials under the heading Who Knows What, there are several lists. Finance Minister Grant Robertson is on the number one list of those in the know, but there's zero information about what exactly that means and if he knew about allegations of sexual assault. We asked him to clear that up.
I'm comfortable with what I've done in this
Have there been any personal or political relationships with the family of the man that have caused any conflict?
This is an ongoing process with the QC, and I think if I say anything about the person accused here, I run the risk of compromising that process, so I'm simply not able to say anything.
Are you satisfied that any potential conflicts of interest have been dealt with or addressed during this whole story or this whole situation?
Well, as I say, I endorse the comments of the Prime Minister. Beyond that, I don't want to say anything that compromises a process that's still underway with the QC.
Have you spoken to the man who's been accused of this at all in the last few months?
As I say, I really just don't want to get into any of that. I believe that there's an important process here where the voices of these people need to be heard.
Labour's Rongotai MP Paul Eagle also features on one of the Who Knows lists. He says not true.
I saw the article about me being in the loop, my name being mentioned. That is inaccurate, so I haven't been in the loop.
You have had no complainants come forward to you and you were never told about it under any circumstances?
Under no circumstances. So I've had no complainants come to me and say, hey, here's an issue.
Had you heard that there were allegations around this person?
I had media ring me and say, have you heard this? I said no, and I had not had any inkling of any source of any issue.
As for the man at the centre of the sexual assault allegations, he's still employed at Parliament.
I'm seeking advice now on those matters, but those are keeping in mind again, none of these matters were raised with the alleged offender's employer, but I'm seeking advice.
What can you do in that situation? Would you look to stand him down rather than just have him involved?
Again, this is an employment matter. I'm seeking some advice.
Meanwhile, Checkpoint's contacted the Labour Party to see who's in charge now that Nigel Haworth's gone. No response so far. But the senior vice president is Tracy McClellan, the third person who sat on Labour's investigation committee. Nigel Haworth says in a statement that he's decided, regardless of the outcome of the appeal process into the complaints, fresh leadership will be required to take forward any recommendations from that process. He says he has greatly enjoyed his time as president and will continue in his lifelong support of Labour and its principles. It's almost 22 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Really keen for your feedback on this one. Is Nigel Haworth's resignation enough or should more be done? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. This is not the end. That's the message from the police inspector in charge of the investigation into the brutal killing of Upper Hutt woman Lois Tolley after an arrest was finally made in the case. 2 years and 9 months after the 30-year-old was shot execution style in her home, a 27-year-old man has been charged with her murder. And the police are now warning others who they believe were involved that they're coming for them. Emma Hatton reports.
Police believe that 4 people were responsible for the execution-style killing of Lois Tolley at her Upper Hutt home on December 9th, 2016. One 27-year-old man has been arrested and appeared briefly in the Hutt Valley District Court today. About a dozen family and friends of Ms Tolley watched from the public gallery as the man was granted interim name suppression, his lawyer arguing that his right to a fair trial would be at risk should his name and picture be published. Outside court, Ms Tolley's aunt Yvonne Tolley thanked police for their doggedness.
Hopefully this will help us for the rest of our journey because it's been a very, very long time. None of us have got closure and it's something that we really, really want to have. So I do think,
that's right.
Thank you. There's no rest. It doesn't go. It doesn't leave us.
Standing at Yvonne Tolley's side, Inspector Scott Miller, who has been leading the case since the beginning.
I've personally spoken to Lois' mum, Catherine, every 2 weeks for 2 years and 9 months, and often that is very hard, obviously for the family, but they are very strong at this time.
At a media conference just weeks after the 2016 murder, and only 2 days after Christmas, her mother Catherine MacDonald described their grief.
There hasn't been a Christmas. She was looking forward to us coming over for Christmas. She was counting the days down till we got here.
Today, Inspector Miller admitted it had been a long wait for the family, but was glad there had been a breakthrough.
My main feeling of relief is for the family. But again, it's very hard for the family because it's just another stage in this investigation. So this is not the end.
And he had a message for the remaining 3 suspects.
I know their names. and we will continue to pursue them actively in this inquiry.
The man was remanded in custody until a High Court appearance next month. He did not seek bail. Upon being stood down, some sitting in the public gallery yelled abuse at him as he was ushered out back by police. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
It's been dubbed this generation's Bastion Point, the standoff at Ihumātao in South Auckland, which burst into the headlines in July after an eviction notice was served to protesters who wanted to stop a housing development on the land. Thousands flocked to the site from all over the country. Politicians and dignitaries, with the notable exception of Jacinda Ardern, visited and concerts were held. But with a resolution yet to be hammered out, what is actually going on the ground there? More than 50 days after the first call to action. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Munro paid a visit to Ihumātao and found dozens of people remain on the whenua, and they aren't planning on going anywhere.
A morning karakia and the rising of the Kingitanga flag welcome another day on the whenua at Ihumātao.
We are very honoured to have our King's flag flying on our whenua. It's a sign of the tribe is in discussion, and the day it comes down will be the day that everything will be resolved.
Tents are soggy and paddocks have become muddy bogs after torrential rain, but standing around the ahika, a fire burning since the start of the occupation, spirits are as high as ever.
Would you sign the paper? Oh, today or tomorrow, you know. 'Cause we gotta go and get our own land back. Yes, we're hearty in the rain.
The thousands of people who gathered here over the past 7 weeks have dispersed. Yellow patches of grass show where their tents once stood. But for around 50 people, the occupation is far from over.
And my friend called it hectic peace. It's a fighting the elements, and also there's a culture clash going on. There's not just Māori and Pākehā, there's also people from the islands, and there's been so many different people through here. So it's been just, everything that happens out there in the world happens here too, but it's compact. It's hard work to get along with people you never thought you would, but we've really enjoyed it, and the experience has brought us so much peace and joy. Somebody left me all their dishes to do, so we've got to...
Danielle Reekwell has been at Ihumātao with her daughter for 50 days.
Everything that you have at the comfort of home is not here, so it's camping in the winter, and it's a lot of hard work with the mud and dishes and cooking and everything like that.
13-year-old Kahu lives next door with his whānau.
Got all my stuff for when I go for showers and that. Got my toothbrush and toothpaste and my soaps and links and stuff. Oh, the best is doing it by yourself, like, I don't know, building a fire by yourself, cooking for yourself. It's pretty fun, eh? Being like a survivalist. No.
And what are the hardest bits about being here?
Not playing Fortnite, Battle Royale. Yeah, I miss it, eh?
Occupiers are here in and day out, building, fixing, painting and teaching. Everyone lends a hand, and tamariki join wānanga to learn from their neighbours.
We've got such a good group of kids in tamariki. It's a good blend, all from all over New Zealand. You know, a lot from Ngāpuhi, a lot from Taranaki, Tūhoe, and even from here.
All the campers are self-sufficient. The huge catering operations of several weeks ago are gone, and most kai is cooked on fires or gas stoves at campsites. Portaloos and water tanks are available. Most people use showers at local marae or with whānau living nearby, and there's a big push to reduce waste or upcycle wherever possible, including a massive whare in the middle of the campground.
All the wood's been donated from the locals, and the pellet teams around the industrial area here. Wood as far as, way up north. They've come hundreds of miles just to drop wood off to be a part of the occupation and to just keep us warm over these cold, wet nights, really.
The cold, the wet and the wind present the biggest challenges for those living here, but karaoke in the evening and personally delivered hot water bottles from the Hotiwaka help keep things warm.
For our whānau, it's like bringing us closer together, this kaupapa.
Like, some of us never used to talk to each other, and now we're like hip to hip.
It's actually quite a blessing to be here and to feel that type of energy.
There are now 3 police officers on site every day, down from the dozens who arrived 7 weeks ago, and several Māori wardens. School groups and visitors pass through the village each day, like Chris Maxwell from Otepoti.
Back in the day there was Pākai Ture, and then there was the one that was fairly infamous, which was Takaparafa, Bastion Point. So it's really very much the same. It feels very much the same. I just think it's a new generation coming through. And I love the fact that, you know, they stand strong and they're leading the way.
Discussions about the land are continuing between mana whenua and the kingitanga. Those meetings remain confidential with no indication of when they'll be complete, but campers on the front lines insist they'll be here as long as it takes.
I don't plan on going anywhere until the land is given back to the people it originally came from.
So it should be too long inside Worders, so it doesn't matter how long it is, we'll get it done. Yeah.
The waiting is the biggest challenge. You know, we're still waiting for a conclusion. We're still waiting for an answer. We're still waiting on the King to get back to us. We're still waiting on the Crown to come back to us. We're still waiting for Jacinda to come and see us.
And that report was from Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Munro at Ihumātao. And that will go up on our Facebook page and online if you want to look back and see exactly the conditions that the community is living in there. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, why depressed patients say health officials have treated them like guinea pigs. Apple bets big on its new phone cameras, and what's behind a vaping illness outbreak in the US. We would love your feedback on anything you've seen on the program today. Do you think the Prime Minister should go to Ihumātao? What do you make of the resignation of the Labour Party president, or anything else that's on your mind? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go now to Susanna, though, with the headlines.
The National Party Deputy Leader is calling for senior staff in the Prime Minister's office to resign, saying they knew for some time about sexual assault allegations relating to a Labour Party staffer. One of the people on the Labour Party's panel that investigated the initial allegations, Hani Hemi, has told Checkpoint they weren't told they involved claims of sexual assault. The inspector in charge of the investigation into Lois Tolley's murder says he is relieved to have made an arrest 2.5 years after her death. A 27-year-old man arrested for the execution-style murder of the Upper Hutt woman in December 2016 appeared in court today. Inspector Scott Miller says the police are pursuing other people they believe were also involved. The campaign team for a Muslim candidate in the Porirua local body elections suspect racism is behind vandalism targeting her billboards. Rabia Inayatula's billboards at 3 sites in the region have been repeatedly knocked down and stolen. One of her campaign managers, David Weinstein, says Miss Inayatula's billboard is often the only one that's vandalised. The head of police in Auckland says the latest escape will be included in a national review of the police's custody and transport of offenders. A man who got away from officers in Avondale yesterday by pretending he was about to vomit is the 5th man to escape from the police in 3 weeks. School nurses are now being registered as vaccinators in a bid to reach about 17,000 Auckland teenagers who have not had the MMR injection. More than 20 nurses will be registered to administer the vaccine at 34 schools throughout South Auckland. MPs say they are frustrated about comments by MedSafe and the Health Ministry over an antidepressant brand change. More than 500 adverse side effects have been reported since the change to a generic brand of venlafaxine, and a petition is seeking an inquiry into Pharmac's safety protocols for generic medications. National's health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse says MedSafe's comments lack empathy. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thank you, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time now for the business news with Nona Pelsier. Hi, Nona. Small businesses, you say, are finding it really hard to pay their bills. What's the problem?
Well, large businesses aren't paying theirs is the big problem.
So trickle down.
Yeah, the trickle down, it's more than a trickle down. It's more like a mountain. It's $7.4 billion of overdue payments. So yeah, I know it's a lot, isn't it? So yeah, this is a concern because small businesses are having a hard time already, and on any particular day, an average business has got like $7,000 of money owing to them, and the overdue accounts are up to 16 days late. So this is quite concerning, and the main reason for this is that large businesses are too slow to pay their accounts. Now, this is a big issue which we heard of last year with Fonterra. They backed away from this 90-day payment thing because it was under a lot of criticism as a result of that. We have seen also in the UK and in the United States there are code of conducts that suggest that large businesses should be more careful about paying small businesses promptly. The government here has suggested that there could be some regulation pending if people don't pull up their socks, so to speak. And Xero is saying, look, it was a bit of an eye-opener for that company. They're going to do more to make sure that they're paying small businesses more promptly, and they're challenging other companies to do the same.
Interesting to see if they take that up. Okay, so Spark is making soothing noises about how it's ready for the Rugby World Cup.
Yes, that's right, because there's a lot of anxiety about it. There are people, especially in rural communities, are concerned that they may not be able to see the Rugby World Cup. But look, Spark is confident that they've got
this
things
is because
in place.
it's on an online platform.
That's right. It's running through broadband, so it's not. But look, they're confident that they have put all the checks and balances in place. They're urging people who haven't already subscribed to do so. Of course, there are other mechanisms for viewing it through Sky, etc. But look, Spark is confident that they're going to deliver the Rugby World Cup to the expectations of sport fans everywhere. So we'll see what happens.
Regardless of where they're living.
Regardless of where they're living. That's right. That's what they're saying.
Stay tuned, literally and figuratively. Right. What about the rest of the markets today, Nona?
Well, a bit of a shocker today. Really? Yes, indeed. Now, New Zealand seems to be a bit alone here, not in a good way, I have to say. Our market fell 2% today. That's the NZX Top 50 Index, down 218 points to 10,925. Now, that's still a very healthy index. And part of the reason is that it seems, and it's hard to know for certain because this is a really volatile market, overall global markets, is that some investors may be feeling that central banks won't cut interest rates as much as others are expecting. And so that if interest rates go up, there'd be an unwinding of what's come before. And so they're taking position out of some of New Zealand's stocks that offer high dividends. And they're pretty pricey stocks too. It's the big sort of the utilities, those sort of, risk-averse stocks. And there seems to be a shift into value stocks. These are companies that are, the value of the shares are a bit better priced. Our prices are quite high. I mean, it's clear that our market's got pricey companies in it. Anyway, so
$1
we've been marked down. We've been marked down, and look, that's the biggest drop in nearly a year. So yeah, significant. On the other hand, the Kiwi dollar is fairly steady at 64.3 US cents, 93.5 Australian, and 52 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Palsio with our business numbers there. They were just numbers. That's how a quantity surveyor describes how Arrow International treated customers during his time working there. Arrow International, which collapsed earlier this year, project managed AMI and Southern Response's earthquake claims. A team from Arrow still works with Southern Response on its outstanding claims. Southern Response has refused every interview request Checkpoint has put to them in recent weeks. But former quantity surveyor Stephen Betts was happy to speak. Logan Church reports.
My name is Stephen Betts. I worked for Arrow for 7 months. I was leader of a team of alleged quantity surveyors, and it was not a happy experience for me, but they paid me well, so I stayed.
Stephen Betts says he led a team of 5 other quantity surveyors at the Arrow International buildings at Show Place in Christchurch for 7 months in 2011. The 80-year-old remembers his pay being about $70,000 a year.
Arrow were preparing what they call DRAs or DRRAs for Southern Response, and my job and the job of the team that I worked with was to prepare the estimates for the value of the repairs or restoration of the buildings involved.
The DRA, a detailed repair or rebuild analysis, was given to customers to show how much it would cost to fix or rebuild their house. A recent High Court's ruling revealed Southern Response's practice of creating 2 DRAs with 2 different cost estimates. The lower cost DRA would be given to the customer, the other would stay with Southern Response. The High Court found that this was deceptive and misleading. Stephen Betts, who has been in this industry for most of his working life, worked at Arrow the year before AMI transitioned into Southern Response, after the government bought out its earthquake claims. He says he noticed things go missing from DRAs as they changed hands. He says his office-based jobs involved receiving information from an assessor who had been out to a quake-damaged property, and then collating that information into a DRA.
I was working on an estimate for a house, and there's a section on the DRA covering windows and curtains. And I noticed that there were no curtains on this particular house. The person who had been out to the site and been in the house and made his report on his iPad was walking behind me as I noticed this. So I called out to him, "Hey, are there any curtains in this house?" And he replied to me, "Oh, there's heaps." I said, "Well, there's none on this report you've given to me." "Oh, I'll send it to you again," he said, which he did, and there were the curtains.
And this after he had written one of his DRAs.
While I had priced certain items on my DRA, they had disappeared by the time they were transferred back.
Stephen Betts says he was required to complete 6 such reports a day, often on complicated and high-cost claims. He says the attitude the organisation had towards its customers was obvious.
They were just numbers. There was no kind of concept of them as being people, or that we should care for them, or that we should make sure that they got what they were entitled to. It was just a question of churning out these reports as quickly as you could, and 6 a day was what was expected.
Former AMI and current Southern Response customers have described to Checkpoints the incredible toll that sorting out their claims has taken on them and their families. Like the Dons.
It's been really, really hard. Thank goodness we're really strong as a couple, because I'm sure it must have told on a lot of people. In stress and in relationships, families, in many ways.
Like Mark Gilmore and Althea Callis.
But it was just such a stressful time. If we'd have been paid out what we believe is the correct amount, it would have changed our life completely.
Yeah, our decisions would have been completely different.
Like the Williamsons.
Anxiety came to the fore, and health-wise, Ellie's got the couple of health problems, and that didn't help. Didn't help at all, and it didn't help me either.
I asked Stephen Betts if he felt any responsibility for his role in this.
Yes, I do, and I was a bit mildly embarrassed at wanting to stay with Arrow, but I had my own interests as well, of course, and my own interests were that they were paying me well and I would stay as long as I could. But yes, I did feel, and partly the reason that I'm here, I did feel this is not really an ethical thing to do.
Stephen Betts says he resigned from Arrow after about 7 months. He says he was struggling with the computer system they used, and after several meetings with management, both parties agreed to part ways. In a somewhat ironic twist, he is now fighting Southern Response over his own claim, which is deadlocked. When Mr. Betts resigned, he signed a confidentiality agreement with Arrow, so we asked him why he wanted to come forward and share his story of his time there.
Because I'm sick of all of the underhand dealings that have been going on, of which I'm quite aware. I don't feel that I have to be cowed by that. I feel it's worth standing up and fighting it.
Arrow International went into voluntary administration earlier this year, but a team from Arrow still works with Southern Response. We went to the communications company Southern Response is using for media inquiries. Our interview request was declined. Instead, in a statement from Southern Response Chief Executive Anthony Honeybone, it says Mr. Betts exited his role at Arrow International under a confidential agreement and it can't comment further. Mr. Honeybone says he understands that Mr. Betts' claim that there was a 6 scope of works report quota per day is inaccurate and that accuracy was never compromised for speed. And it says it did not believe it would be appropriate to discuss the details of his case in the media. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Health officials have been accused of using depressed patients as guinea pigs by changing an antidepressant drug to a generic one. The comments came at a Health Select Committee today where a petition was presented calling for an inquiry into Pharmac's patient safety protocols for generic medications. Political reporter Charlie Drever was there and filed this report.
There were tears and hugs outside the Health Select Committee room today. Sarah McRae and Trudy Webber relieved they had finally been heard. Miss McRae says after being stable for years on Effexa, she began experiencing serious side effects.
I was anxious, I was withdrawn, I had major panic attacks, I couldn't leave the house, I couldn't see people, I just completely withdrew from life. I was incapable of looking after myself, let alone my children. My husband took a significant amount of time off work because he had to step in and support the family. There was nothing in my life that should have triggered that.
She later realised the problems began when she was switched from Effexa to the generic Enlafax brand. Around 45,000 people are estimated to have had their medications switched. Trudy Webber says the change caused her to become so depressed she planned to end her life.
And I had things to look forward to. I had my daughter's 21st birthday coming up and she was graduating from Wintec as a registered nurse, and I couldn't understand why I was in this pit of despair.
Both women say consumers and doctors should have been properly informed of any risks involved with the change in medication. Health officials were informed of more than 500 reports of adverse side effects, but MedSafe's group manager Chris James says the report increase does not raise safety or quality problems.
The number of reports coming through have been reviewed by both our MedSafe and our experts, and also the independent experts on our advisory committee, a number of times actually. And the reports, while a large number have come through, the type of the reports that have come through when we look at them are not suggesting a quality issue with the product Enlafax.
The Ministry of Health, MedSafe and Pharmac maintain the generic medication works exactly the same as the other brands. But Health Committee Chair Louisa Wall questioned whether patients who were stable for years should have had their medications changed in the first place.
It seems to me that for some of the patients on these drugs, they've been used as guinea pigs. Let's just switch them. Let's just see what happens to them. And if they're adverse, maybe we can switch them back. That's really unacceptable, to be honest.
National's Matt Ducey challenged the legitimacy of what the health officials were saying.
With respect, I don't believe what you've said, because all three of you sat there for the last 20 minutes, a total disconnect with what the submitters said. Their whole petition was about their lived experience, and the pharmacists changed their medication, they weren't informed and they weren't able to manage the side effects.
National's health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse wants better answers from the ministry, especially around communication to patients.
It's fair to say the Select Committee were disappointed with the lack of empathy from MedSafe and the Ministry of Health and the finger-pointing that went on between three government agencies effectively that said there were certain things that could have been done, but it's not our responsibility. That's a frustration.
Michael Woodhouse says the committee will work to make sure they get to the bottom of the medication switch. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
It is about 13 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in contact about anything you've heard on the program today. We'd love to hear from you. If you have been switched from your normal medication to a generic, what's that meant for you? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A woman sexually assaulted by a former Marist brother as a young girl has told a court her life was destroyed by the abuse. Michael Beaumont abused 3 girls while working in his community as a Catholic brother in the 1970s. The crimes went unchecked until the woman went to the police in 2016. And today, more than 40 years later, she got her day in court. Our court reporter Annika Smith was there.
Michael Beaumont sat quietly in the dock as his crimes were laid bare in the North Shore District Court. The 72-year-old was teaching and working as a Catholic Marist brother in a North Island community in the 1970s. As part of the clergy, he was highly respected and welcomed into family homes for prayer, counselling and worship. Sometime in 1977, he visited a family home for a meal and stayed on while the family recited the rosary. It was here, as he was sitting with the family, that he slipped his hand into a 9-year-old girl's underwear. She described the abuse in court today. These are her words, but not her voice.
That night, as my family sat in a circle and prayed the rosary, I sat on the couch next to Brother Michael, excited as a man of God wanted to sit by my side. That was until fear stiffened my body as I felt God's hands creep down into my pants. Inside, my body was screaming, desperate for my mother to open her eyes and to see what Brother Michael was doing to me.
The woman, who was now in her 50s, said no one's eyes opened until prayers were over. She said from that point onwards, her life was shrouded with confusion and self-loathing. Growing up, she repressed her femininity and wasn't able to have boyfriends like other teenagers. The woman said she felt fat and ugly and believed no one would ever love her.
I used to pray to my God to take my life as the punishment of God's wrath was too much for me to bear. I often thought of suicide. My mental health was only worsening, and my physical appearance now matched the ugliness I always felt.
The woman went to the police in 2016. Beaumont was charged with 1 charge of indecency with a girl under 12 and 2 charges of indecency with a girl aged between 12 and 16. He had offended twice more in the 1970s, once sitting a girl on his lap to fondle her chest, and in another instance, kissing a girl on the neck before trying to put his hands down her top. Judge Jonathan Down said Beaumont's offending was a gross breach of trust.
In offending against these 3 children, you clearly breached a significant burden of trust that those parents put in you, and they had every good reason to expect from you a very high standard of conduct.
Beaumont pleaded guilty to the lead offence the day he was due to stand trial, having previously admitted the other charges. On top of the sexual assaults, he also admitted possessing fantasy literature that detailed sexual violence and bestiality against children. The 72-year-old's victim, who delivered a moving victim impact statement this afternoon, said the effects of Beaumont's offending lived on in her. She said even as a mother, many years after the abuse, she had pushed her own children away when they reached the age she was when she was assaulted.
The real tragedy of child sex abuse is that one day that child grows up and becomes a mother. However, the wounded child remains inside the mother forever, trapped with a clouded worldview on life.
Judge Down heard robust submissions from both the Crown and Defence during the 2-hour sentencing hearing. The court heard Beaumont had volunteered time with Lifeline for the past decade, work Judge Down said appeared to be penance for the defendant's crimes. The judge decided on a sentence of home detention, 11 months for the sexual abuse and a further 1 month for the objectionable literature. Beaumont's victim cried in the public gallery as Judge Down thanked her for bearing her soul to the court.
I never cease to be amazed at the enormous impact that even one offence of this type can have upon an individual for the rest of their lives.
Judge Down told the victim he hoped she could now move on with her life. On top of the home detention, he also ordered Beaumont pay her $3,000 in reparation. I tāmaki makoto, mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Annika Smith-Aho.
To the US now, the president there, Donald Trump, has abruptly fired his national security advisor, John Bolton, amid disagreements over foreign policy challenges such as North Korea, Iran, Afghanistan and Russia. Mr. Bolton was Mr. Trump's 3rd national security advisor in as many years. He has argued that he wasn't fired, but that he resigned. With the details, here's the BBC's John Sopel from Washington.
John Bolton is the hawk's hawk, acerbic, dry, clever and confrontational. And this morning, still to be found in the White House grounds, but not anymore. He's been turfed out by presidential tweet. I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House. I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions, as did others in the administration, and therefore I asked John for his resignation. But highly unusually, and in a sure sign of the acrimony over this departure, Bolton also took to Twitter to challenge the president's version of events. I offered to resign last night, and President Trump said, "Let's talk about it tomorrow."
Hello, everybody.
At a White House briefing with the Treasury Secretary and the Secretary of State, 2 men that John Bolton had clashed most with, there were grins all round.
So last night the president asked for Ambassador Bolton's resignation. As I understand it, it was received this morning. The president's entitled to the staff that he wants at any moment. This is a staff person who works directly for the president of the United States, and he should have people that he trusts and values and whose efforts and judgments benefit him in delivering American foreign policy.
And far from seeking to paper over the cracks, they were instead pulling back the wallpaper and saying, just look at these fissures.
I don't talk about the inner workings of how this all goes. We all give our candid opinions. There were many times Ambassador Bolton and I disagree, that's to be sure.
This president is often depicted as impetuous and trigger-happy, restrained by his advisers. But with John Bolton, it may have been the other way round.
I actually temper John, which is pretty amazing, isn't it? Nobody thought that was going to happen. I'm the one that tempers him, but that's okay.
On any number of policy issues, Donald Trump and John Bolton were not aligned. On Iran, Bolton advocated a more aggressive military response. The president wanted restraint. On Venezuela, John Bolton thought sanctions could bring the overthrow of Nicolas Maduro. The policy has failed. And most recently, the president wanted to go ahead at the weekend with a summit at Camp David with Taliban leaders. But this week is the anniversary of 9/11, and Bolton thought the idea was crazy. And that view, somehow, found its way into the public domain. Perhaps the final straw for the president. And so Donald Trump is now casting around for his fourth national security advisor in under 3 years, one of the most pivotal jobs in any American administration.
And US authorities are scrambling to understand an outbreak of mysterious vaping-linked lung illnesses that have put healthy people in the hospital in a serious condition. A sixth death in the US has now been confirmed to be connected to e-cigarettes, which mimic smoking by heating liquids with substances such as nicotine and marijuana. Doctors say the devices are becoming hugely popular with teenagers across the US, and they're concerned over what looks to be a growing major public health issue. CNN's Tom Foreman reports.
My lungs were bleeding and I wasn't able to breathe on my own, and I was taking a lot of short and rapid breaths.
Emma Boland has spent the past 10 days trying to get through the pain.
It started out as stomach pains and then really bad headaches. And the stomach pain got to the point where I couldn't even sit up. I just had to be in a fetal position. I was just crying.
And Boland says she had no idea what was happening. Just days earlier, she was with her friends at Riverside High School vaping. Like Boland says she did every day for more than a year and a half.
The flavors are tempting. There's all different kinds, from sweets to baked goods.
But doctors at Children's Hospital say when the 16-year-old arrived here, she had symptoms that they have become familiar with.
She came in and got pretty sick, required extra oxygen, was working harder to breathe.
Dr. Kishore Velati is treating Boland and says she is fortunate. She's recovering.
Some kids are actually getting very sick, in fact, even dying from this situation. But thankfully, the ones that I've been seeing, they get better once we stop the offending agent, the vaping.
But Boland still has a way to go. She is now wearing a nicotine patch to help her stop vaping, something this teen says is not only about her anymore.
I want to save as many people as I can from having to go through this.
And that was Tom Foreman reporting. Apple has unveiled its latest products, including a triple-camera iPhone with a processor that's been updated to be faster while consuming, less power, I think it is? Yeah, and the tech giant, which has now slipped behind Microsoft as the most valuable in the US, is bracing itself for further damage from the US-China trade war. The BBC's Dave Lee reports.
Apple, of course, heralded the new products, 3 new iPhones and an updated Apple Watch, as a giant leap in innovation. But the fair perception here is that Apple is playing it safe on its major products. Better cameras, longer battery life, all appealing for those eyeing an upgrade. Apple's challenges lie in its big unknowns. The first is whether it has the ability to make good TV. It announced its streaming service, Apple TV Plus, would be significantly cheaper than the likes of Netflix, but as yet, Apple hasn't made any good programming to put on it. More broadly, if President Trump keeps his word, this December will see a host of trade tariffs imposed, affecting 92% of Apple's hardware products. Such is the firm's reliance on Chinese manufacturing. Apple hasn't upped prices in anticipation of that, suggesting it's ready to absorb costs should it need to.
And that was Dave Lee in San Francisco there. Now time for a bit of your feedback. Returning to our earlier story in the program, this is Party President Nigel Haworth's resignation. He resigned about lunchtime today, says he tendered his resignation basically after a meeting with the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister has confirmed that she's read correspondence from the complainants, and that correspondence shows her that serious allegations were made to the Labour Party some months ago. A lot of you have got in contact about that story. First off, this one. Jacinda referred to it as a sexual assault on the 10th of August. Why is she not being held to account for lying to the people of New Zealand and trying to cover up sexual assaults by people in her own office? As a lifelong Labour voter, I am absolutely disgusted by this behaviour. I will never forgive them. Judith has also been in touch, who says Haworth is the fall guy to protect the Prime Minister. Media interviews over the last few weeks show that she knew allegations were sexual. She needs to resign too. On the other side of the fence, people are questioning National's motives. Louise says National has been extremely effective in relentless attacks on Labour. And someone else says, looks a bit like dirty politics.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Ihumātao tēnei. One of 3 people who investigated complaints about a Labour Party staffer says she's beginning to doubt her recollection that there were no allegations of sexual assault or abuse. Labour's President Nigel Haworth resigned today over the controversy, and the Prime Minister revealed she had seen correspondence confirming the complainants had raised extremely serious allegations to party members. Mr Haworth still stands by his earlier statements. The claims were not provided to the investigation panel, and he was not told about them at a prior meeting. Honey Hemi, who was on the investigating panel, initially told Checkpoint she agreed that no one had made such serious allegations.
In my opinion, there wasn't. It was earlier this year too, and I've taken on other projects, and in the last 24 hours I'm trying to get myself back in the beginning of this year. And at the moment I'm starting to doubt my own recollection.
Honey Hemi, one of the 3 Labour Party members who investigated complaints about a Labour staffer. The inspector in charge of Lois Tolley's murder case says today's arrest is not the end of the investigation. A 27-year-old man appeared at the Hutt Valley District Court this morning, charged with a 2016 murder, and has been remanded in custody. Inspector Scott Miller says the police are actively pursuing other people who they believe were involved. A woman sexually assaulted by a Marist brother as a young girl has told a court it destroyed her life. Michael Beaumont was sentenced to 12 months home detention today for abusing 3 girls while working as a Catholic brother in the 1970s. Annika Smith reports.
As part of the clergy, Michael Beaumont was welcomed into the homes of families for counselling, prayers and worship. During the 1970s, he abused 3 girls, in one case slipping his hand into a 9-year-old girl's underwear while he sat with her family, their eyes closed in prayer. Beaumont was charged after this victim, now in her 50s, went to the police in 2016. The 72-year-old pleaded guilty to sex charges earlier this year and later admitted a further charge of possessing objectionable literature. He was sentenced to 12 months home detention in the North Shore District Court this afternoon. Ko Annika Smith, tēnei.
Queenstown accommodation providers are fearful they'll be hit if a bed tax is introduced into the resort town. Queenstown Lakes District Council secured permission from the government to start drafting a local bill introducing the levy. The levy would be a 5% cost added onto short-term room rates. But mayoral candidate Nick Kiddle says it unfairly targets accommodation providers. Mr Kiddle says a broader local sales tax across all tourism operators should be introduced instead.
The big guys who've got, the big hotel chains that are affiliated with offshore brands, they can probably wear something like this, but the little mom and pop, businesses are going to suffer greatly. Tourism will suffer as a result of a very blunt and naive instrument of this sort.
Nick Kiddle. The bill is expected to reach Parliament next year. The Māori Council has warned Air New Zealand for trying to trademark a logo that has the words Kia ora. In May, the company applied to trademark the logo for its in-flight magazine, which is called Kia ora. Māori Council Executive Director Matthew Tukaki says he's threatening legal action because trademarking the words is an insult to Māori. He says he's sick of businesses profiting from appropriating Māori culture. Air New Zealand says protecting its logo is a standard process for businesses. It says it's proud to promote the Māori language. A young Muslim candidate in the Porirua local election says vandals who have burned, knocked down and stolen her billboards appear to be singling her out. Rabia Ihumātao, who's 21, says she does not want to think the vandalism is racially motivated, but it seems to be an ongoing campaign.
When your signs are the only ones that are being vandalised, like brought down with a bunch of signs being okay and not even touched, you do sort of like jump to that assumption that, you are being a bit targeted.
Rabia Ihumātao says the vandalism has made her more determined to push for change. Pope Francis has warned that ideologues and those who oppose his leadership could cause a split within the Catholic Church. Speaking after visiting 3 African countries, the pontiff told journalists that some of his critics smile and show their teeth and then knife him in the back. The BBC's Martin Bashir is travelling with the Pope.
Pope Francis said that he welcomed robust dialogue but warned that ideologues are causing splits within the Roman Catholic Church. Referring to a recently published book entitled How Americans Want to Change the Pope, he said that the problem of theological division had marked the Church from its earliest formation in the New Testament. He said that he'd faced several accusations that were inaccurate, including the charge of being a communist.
Martin Bashir reporting. It's 6:05. The All Blacks have hit the ground running in Japan, with the players quickly having to adjust from the New Zealand winter to the sweltering heat of their Kashiwa base. Halfback Weber says they were well prepared for the 20-degree swing in temperature, describing the mid-30s in Japan as similar to pre-season Super Rugby training. Meanwhile, coach Steve Hansen says having almost 2 weeks to prepare for their opening match takes the pressure off.
Gives you more time to work on the little things that we know we have to get better at, and you can really emphasise those. So there's some real specifics that we have to get right to compete against South Africa.
Steve Hansen. The former England cricket captain turned commentator Sir Geoffrey Boycott is not bothered about criticism of his knighthood. Domestic abuse charities and Labour say the honour should be removed, as Boycott was convicted of beating his girlfriend in 1998. Boycott was fined $10,000 and given a 3-month suspended sentence for the incident, which occurred in a hotel on the French Riviera. Boycott has always denied the assault and in a BBC radio interview maintained comments by the head of the women's aid charity Adina Clare are irrelevant.
Don't care a toss about her, love. It's 25 years ago, so you can take your political nature and do whatever you want with it. You want to talk to me about my knighthood, it's very nice of you to have me, but I couldn't give a toss.
Sir Geoffrey Boycott. New Zealand squash player Paul Cole has started his season with a convincing win to move into the French Open quarterfinals. Cole has beaten England's George Parker in just 35 minutes. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tracy Tafile on plans for an afternoon of poetry and beach tagging, otherwise known as writing in the sand. On Piha, John Dawson says it's time to update our laws on mental capacity. Who decides for us when we are unable to decide for ourselves? And there's sure to be a little piece of heaven after the news at 7. Yours could be next. So send your happy song story to nights@rnz.co.nz and join me, Brian Crump, tonight on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, cloudy periods and isolated showers until tomorrow afternoon. Bay of Plenty, mainly fine. Waikato to Kapiti, including central high country, cloudy periods with the odd shower in the west and about high ground. Gisborne to Waitatapa, partly cloudy with isolated showers tonight, fine weather tomorrow. For Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine. Bulla and Westland, mainly fine tonight, the occasional shower about Bulla cooler. Showers tomorrow, turning to rain about southwestland from tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy. Fiordland and Stewart Island, a few showers turning to rain for a time tonight and again tomorrow evening, with heavy falls later in the day. Otago and Southland, isolated showers about Southland and Clutha tonight, otherwise fine. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a period of rain this evening. RNZ National, it's 6:08.
Thank you, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Labour Party President Nigel Haworth is the first political casualty of the Labour sex allegations scandal, tendering his resignation today, effective immediately. The Labour Party and the Prime Minister have been under intense pressure this week after their handling of allegations against a Labour Party staffer. The turning point for Mr Haworth was this morning when Jacinda Ardern received correspondence the complainants had sent to the party some months ago. Our political editor Jane Patterson filed this report.
I do want to offer an apology on behalf of the Labour Party to those complainants in this case who have gone through a process that I believe has caused them harm.
Jacinda Ardern apologising to the group of complainants after reading some of their communications to the party this morning.
We sought that correspondence and upon reading that it became very clear to me that despite the best intentions, despite the plans of the party to conduct a process that they thought would bring resolution, it caused harm.
Ms Ardern contacted Mr Haworth this morning to ask him to explain.
I raised my concerns with the party president and he offered me his resignation.
Just to be clear, so Nigel Haworth is still maintaining that he didn't know about the sexual allegations, but you're not confirming that you've seen evidence to the contrary of what he's saying?
Again, I'm stating that the party maintains the statement and position that it released yesterday. Those matters are now for a QC.
A number of the complainants have been in contact with National's Deputy Leader Paula Bennett. She used parliamentary privilege to name a number of the Prime Minister's most senior staff, as well as a Cabinet Minister, who she says have known for some time about the sexual nature of the allegations.
I have been told by the complainants that Jacinda Ardern's former Chief of Staff, Mike Munro, knew about the allegations. Her Chief Press Secretary, Andrew Campbell, knew about the allegations. And the Director of her Leader's Office, Rob Salmond, knew about the allegations. I have been told by two victims who work in Parliament that they went to Rob Salmond around Christmas time and made a complaint about the alleged perpetrator. The Prime Minister has constantly said her office did not receive complaints.
She told the House Jacinda Ardern cannot avoid scrutiny.
The Prime Minister cannot keep her head in the sand and pretend like it is happening somewhere far, far away. It is happening in her own office, in her own organisation. She is the leader of the Labour Party. The alleged perpetrator works in her leader's office. He works for her.
Outside the House, Ms Bennett said it's not possible Ms Ardern wasn't aware of the allegations before this week.
There are so many senior people within the Prime Minister's office and other senior ministers that know and knew the extent of it, that it's inconceivable that she wasn't told.
Ms Bennett also told Parliament the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, knew about the seriousness of the allegations. He was asked if he'd been told about the alleged sexual assault by a complainant in June.
I'm going to respect the privacy of the young people who are involved in this situation. There is a process to go through with the QC. I think it's important that the voices of these people are heard.
A statement's been issued on behalf of 6 of the victims. They say while Nigel Haworth's resignation is a step towards acknowledging that Labour has failed these survivors, they still would like an apology from him. They also point out there's still a person facing serious allegations and action has to be taken to ensure no one else is harmed. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
And Jane joins us now from Parliament. Good evening, Jane. So, Nigel Haworth's resignation clearly damaged control there, but is it enough?
Look, this will cauterise the wound for Labour for now. This is a high-profile resignation. It occurred after Ms Ardern and Mr Haworth talked this morning after she read that correspondence and clearly saw massive problems with the way that it's been handled. But there is still pressure on her, and as you've heard on Grant Robertson, on other senior staffers about who knew what and when. And the main question for Jacinda Ardern is still, how was she able to take the assurances from the Labour Council that the allegations were not sexual in nature when there'd been so much publicity? And when that question is put to her, she keeps saying that she took those assurances after asking the council several times and took them at their word. So I think with Nigel Haworth gone now, it takes a bit of the heat out of the questions about his handling of it and what he knew. But now Ms Ardern will be hoping that it will be pushed down the track of that QC review, and at that point when it's reported to her there will be more questions of course about what had happened, but she'll be hoping that the heat has gone out of this issue in the meantime. I would note that the staff, the man at the centre of the allegations, Ms Ardern said this afternoon that he is still employed by Parliamentary Service and she's taking advice on that situation, but there haven't been any work-related complaints made to his employer, Ms Ardern says. I also understand that he has quit any position, any elected positions that he did hold in the Labour Party, and is not having anything to do with party events or anything else while these allegations are still under investigation.
It's interesting, as you say, Jacinda Ardern has said that she sought reassurances and were given them, but today she's sought, independent documentation. Why couldn't she have done that earlier? Has she said anything about that?
No, she hasn't, and that was an interesting point. She said that they sought the correspondence. She went and asked for that correspondence because obviously the line of questioning had become pretty fraught yesterday, and the discrepancies were becoming very clear about what the party had been telling her and what had been reported in the media or accounts that had been given to the media. So she very much gave the impression yesterday that she was going to leave it up to the QC to look at everything in totality, but obviously felt that more direct and more urgent action was needed. So looked at those correspondence, and it sounded like they really did, of course, raise some major alarm bells for her. The resignation of the President came pretty soon after that conversation.
So she's the one that has extended the apology publicly to these people, and she's also saying that she is willing to meet them and she's looking into this. How is she looking in all of this, Jane?
She hasn't looked great. I think today was probably a much better performance because there were consequences. Up until now, it's just been a lot of people with conflicting accounts, her fielding questions on the basis of information given to her. But in the end, she is the leader of the Labour Party. She is the Prime Minister, and some kind of response was needed. And I imagine that that's what's prompted that request for that communication today. I think she'll be on a stronger footing now. The party element of it has been dealt with in a manner. You'll note that the victims are still wanting an apology for Nigel Haworth, but she will really be looking over the next couple of days to, as I said, push it off into that QC review. As we've seen in politics, whenever a review or an investigation is ordered, it can give cover to politicians. They can just bat off questions because that is underway. That hadn't been tenable, that approach, until probably that resignation today, but unless other evidence comes up about senior ministers or staffers and that they knew and that they told the Prime Minister, it's probably now in the hands of that QC.
Thank you, Jane. That is our political editor, Jane Patterson. We should say we did invite the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, onto Checkpoint this evening, but we were told her schedule was too busy. School nurses are finally being signed off as vaccinators to reach 17,000 or so Auckland high school students who may not have had the MMR jab. Dozens of nurses are doing their final practical assessments at the Manukau Super Clinic this week, where they give 2 jabs under supervision. Auckland has had 970 confirmed cases of measles so far this year, with the national total sitting at 1,172. Amy Williams visited the Manukau Super Clinic.
Do you know what vaccine you're getting today?
Measles.
Yeah, so MMR. Yeah.
On any given day, there's a queue of people waiting at the Manukau Super Clinic to get the measles vaccine. School nurse Cheryl Gerbic is there doing her final assessment and giving 2 jabs at the clinic.
A bit nerve-wracking. I'm nervous as hell, but I don't know why, because I'm excited at the same time. But once I've got that one, I've got one under my belt.
She works at Sir Edmund Hillary Collegiate, a school in Otara that teaches students from primary to secondary. Ms Gerbic says about 70 students at the school aren't immunised.
Pretty exciting, really. Can't wait in terms of just making sure that our tamariki are looked after and just to stop the spread of this horrible disease.
She's among 25 school nurses who'll give measles vaccines at 34 high schools in South Auckland. 3 schools have started vaccinating on campus. The rest are expected to begin next week. Counties Manukau General Manager of Child, Youth and Maternity, Carmel Ellis, says they've fast-tracked the nurses' training to target schools.
We will potentially reach an additional 17,000 young people through this program. Just looking at our numbers, as we said before, we don't quite know what the number of unimmunised students might be. But if we're looking at kind of our coverage at the moment in terms of people coming through our pop-up clinics, we are struggling with the kind of 15 to 29 age group.
Laura Williams is the lead nurse at Mangere College, where 200 students have not yet had the measles vaccine. She passed her final assessment at the Manukau Super Clinic this week and is looking forward to rolling out the jab at school.
We have a captive audience. I mean, we haven't kidnapped the children, but, we've got these kids that are attending school each day. They're right here, around me right now, and if I'm able to opportunistically if there's consented to it and, they're wanting to get their measles vaccination and I'm able to do it, then this is a perfect environment to do it.
MMR vaccines need to be stored at a low temperature, and specially kitted out containers with a temperature sensor and alarm will be couriered to Auckland schools each day. Health authorities say the program is an important weapon in the war against measles spreading. Auckland Regional Public Health Service has been inundated with notifications of measles cases for months. Its Medical Officer of Health, William Ranger, says the onus is on parents to inform their children's school if their child is confirmed to have measles.
The sheer volume of institutions that have been affected has meant that we've wanted to change the process in this way. But it's very important for early childhood services and schools to know at any time they can call the Regional Public Health Service and we will provide them with advice on how they should respond.
Meanwhile, health authorities are urging everyone to check their immunisation status and get vaccinated against the measles. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
It is 21 after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced his intention to annex the Jordan Valley, a large area of the occupied West Bank, if he wins re-election next week. The televised announcement has caused outrage among Palestinians and has been condemned by Arab foreign ministers. Israel captured the West Bank in a 1967 war, and Palestinians who signed interim peace deals with Israel in the 1990s that include security cooperation want the area as part of a future state. The BBC's Tom Bateman reports.
Mr. Netanyahu began with a significant revelation that President Trump's long-awaited plan to reach a peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians would be published within days of next week's election. It would, he said, involve challenges for Israel as well as what he called opportunities. He then reiterated a highly controversial pledge eventually to annex the West Bank's Jewish settlements, which are seen as illegal under international law. This would have to be done in coordination with the Trump plan, he said, before promising something more immediate.
There is one place where Israeli sovereignty can be applied immediately after the elections, if I receive from you, citizens of Israel, a clear mandate to do so. Today I announce my intention to apply, with the formation of the next government, Israeli sovereignty over the Jordan Valley and northern Dead Sea.
The Jordan Valley makes up around a third of the West Bank, key strategic territory in the area that Palestinians want as part of a future state. The Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, said annexation would see the end of all agreements with Israel, while his chief international negotiator, Saeb Erekat, said it would bury any prospect of peace for 100 years.
Annexation of occupied territories is a war crime. So Mr. Netanyahu and those who help or aid Mr. Netanyahu in such a vision of annexing Jerusalem, annexing Hebron, annexing the Jordan Valley, the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, and then keeping Palestinians in their small towns and villages as prisoners without any freedom, that is a war crime.
Later, Mr. Netanyahu had to be whisked off stage during a campaign event in the southern city of Ashdod as air raid sirens rang out. Israel said it had shot down 2 rockets that were fired by Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. The Prime Minister's announcement comes in the final days of campaigning in Israel's second general election this year. During the summer, he had to abandon efforts to form a government, caught between increasingly demanding potential coalition partners and a looming indictment hearing on corruption allegations, which has left him politically vulnerable.
And that's Tom Bateman in Jerusalem. Queenstown is one step closer to taxing its visitors in a bid to cover infrastructure costs. The government's thrown its support behind a levy for the resort town, saying it will help to introduce a bill to Parliament to turn the bed tax into a reality. If successful, visitors would pay a 5% charge applied to all short-term accommodation, and that's estimated to raise up to $40 million a year. The burden of funding infrastructure currently falls on the district's ratepayers, but there are hopes the levy may be funding a lifeline for Queenstown. Tess Brunton reports.
For Queenstown Lakes District Mayor Jim Bolt, the visitor levy has been a long time coming.
I'm delighted, actually. Well, I started working on it when I was elected almost 3 years ago, so long process, but I'm absolutely delighted, over the moon at the outcome. It's a very good result for our district.
He says at the moment the council's 24,000 ratepayers are footing the bill to fund the necessary infrastructure in the popular tourist destination. The Queenstown Lakes District Council held a non-binding referendum in June to gauge support for a levy. More than 80% of the residents who voted supported a tax, but it needed the government's sign-off to go ahead. Jim Bolt says the current pressure on ratepayers is not sustainable and it needs to stop.
The numbers of people we have coming through the district now, it's like having somebody living in your house, one person in your house every night of the year and not paying anything. To us, that's just not fair, and this means that our visitors, we love them, we want them, but they need to pay their fair share, and this will enable that to happen.
The Queenstown Lakes District Council will now start drafting a local bill so the visitor levy can be introduced. Mayoral candidate and Lakes District Tax Equity Group organiser Nick Kittle says he is surprised to hear the bed tax has been given a green light so close to the local government elections. He's called out Jim Bolt, who is running again for mayor, and the Queenstown Lakes District Council for pursuing it.
We're literally 2 weeks away from potentially seeing him out of office. I don't think that this is the way to conduct a democratic process, and I believe he's just stampeding in an effort to try and get something on the run on the board before he may even lose the next election.
Mr Kittle does not support a bed tax and is instead pitching for a local sales tax to be introduced across all tourism operators.
I'm going to be working with central government to continue the dialogue on a broader-based alternative, which would be far more tolerable and far fairer and probably raise even more revenue. If I'm elected mayor, I will not proceed with this draft local bill to introduce a bed tax.
But Economic Development Minister Phil Twyford says the much-loved destination needs a helping hand.
It is the jewel and the crown
of our tourist economy, but it's really under pressure. So Queenstown has 34 visitors for every ratepayer. That's an extraordinary ratio, and the ratepayer population in Queenstown simply can't properly fund the infrastructure investments that are needed.
He says the levy will be key to helping fund a 30-year infrastructure plan currently in the works. The plan is a collaboration between the government, council, Ngāi Tahu and others to help Queenstown prepare for the future.
That's about ensuring there's good planning to enable the future shape of the city. It's about sorting out the transport problems. It's about ensuring that there's a better supply of affordable housing for people.
Phil Twyford has ruled out other destinations jumping on board with a visitor levy. The bill is expected to be introduced to Parliament in 2020, but even if it's successful, Queenstown is unlikely to have a levy until 2021. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tēnei.
And just some traffic news if you're in Auckland's North Shore tonight. Now, State Highway 1, the northern motorway, has been closed in both directions at Esmond Road, and that was due to a police incident. It has now reopened, but motorists are being warned to expect delays and maybe look for alternative routes. Come off a bit earlier on the motorway if you can. Just time for some checkpoint, for some feedback tonight before we go. This on the generics antidepressants being prescribed to patients and the claim from some people that have been treated as guinea pigs because of this. Someone's got in touch to say, I've been stable on Effixa for years, but the change to Mylan or Enlafax has been terrible. I'm now on twice the dose with associated side effects just to keep me sort of stable. My pharmacist told me I was one of many. Tessa's been in touch with an email, I believe. I was tempted to send all the emails I wrote to RNZ, the Ministry, Pharmac, etc. when I figured out why I had declined so badly. I was essentially unmedicated and had reverted back to when I was first diagnosed as a 19-year-old. I'm now 49. I had stable 10 years leading to the switch, been living with chronic depression but well managed. Then one night a year later, I was in hospital having tried to take my own life. Shocking for me and my family. The sheer arrogance we have experienced while attempting to be heard is appalling from our doctors, psychiatrists, pharmacists and mostly Pharmac. We were supposed to be monitored. Instead, we were fobbed off and told we were reacting to media reports and that there was no difference between the drugs. Thanks for your feedback. We are back again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. One of the investigators of complaints about a Labour Party staffer says she's now doubting her recollection that they did not include allegations of sexual assault. A woman sexually assaulted by a Marist brother as a child has told the court it destroyed her life. He's been sentenced to 12 months home detention for abusing 3 girls. The police say they are still actively pursuing other suspects in relation to the 2016 murder of Upper Hutt woman Lois Tolley. And the Māori Council is threatening Air New Zealand with legal action for trying to trademark a logo that has the words Kia ora. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I think New Zealanders love having access to quality news and information. I mean, the real problem is that the advertising money has gone, mostly gone to Facebook and Google.
Live with local, national and international stories.